Aha! This is Laborc, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. Let's define the edges of her face with night questor flesh. Leave his lips and eye holes black and cover the hands and shoulders as well. There are some parts on her leg where some skin shows through between the leather straps, so make sure you cover those. I didn't notice her shoulders are exposed, so I will cover them later, but the steps are exactly the same, okay? Okay. Sketch the highlight areas with cadian fleshtone. I would like the right side of the face to receive a bigger highlight portion. The reason for that is because it's a bit harder to reach the other side, and that's where I want my focal point to be. Her hand should create a big drop shadow on her face, but I don't want to paint it like that. Leave the eyebrow crevices darker and cover the top side of the knuckles. To have a nice transition between the colors, I use thin layers of paint. So just dilute your paint a little bit until you have a similar consistency, and always make sure you wait for your layers to dry before you apply the next one. Otherwise you will rip off the previous layers with your brush and it won't look smooth, and I will slap on your tiny hand. Push the contrast with radiant flesh on the right side of the face with the same thin layers. You can notice I add some shine to her lips with 2 small dots of cadian fleshtone. Just wanted to mention this if you missed that. It really creates a more feminine looking mouth. But since the detail is so small, I painted it off camera. Okay, so make sure you have a smooth and nicely blended face that looks like a female. We need soft cheeks and a moderately accented chin, otherwise it will look like a dude. For her war paint, I used alaitoc blue, and for her scar I mixed some black with night questor flesh. Just sketch out this triangle shape starting in the middle and add some thickness to it over time. Once you are happy with it, leave it to fully dry or I will slap on your tiny hand. Now cover the whole symbol with temple girl blue and leave a tiny outline of alaitoc blue. Make sure you always leave the eyebrow recess darker as well. Mix some radiant flesh to the alaitoc blue and highlight all the way from the cheekbones and leave a darker part under it. Again, you can leave the eyebrow recess darker to have some depth to it. She's a redhead, so cover her hair with word barrels red. You can leave some darker areas on her ponytail, just glaze over it so we will have high contrast between the shadow and highlight colors. Mix some cadian fleshtone to the word barrels red and create a highlight area close to her halberd shaft and on the top of her ponytail. Lastly, add some cadian fleshtone to the hair, reduce the highlight areas in the previous layer, and you can add some thin lines along the hair locks for some extra detail. Cover all her leather armor with a mix of burnt red and black. Try to leave the crevices black between the leather straps on her hands and feet. Highlight every leather part with burnt red, covering 70% of all the surfaces towards our light source, which is coming from the left. Also cover the furry parts of her clothes and the grip of the halberd while leaving the recesses black. There are only 2 parts we are not covering, and those are the belt buckle and her underskirt. We paint those to a different color later. Next we highlight the weapon handle and the furry parts with morghast bone. Use thin layers and play with the opacity of the layers. There is a simple trick you can do with all kinds of leather straps, like on the weapon handle and on her limbs. Sketch out the highlight part consistently. So basically our weapon shaft is a cylinder, and we can highlight cylinders with a straight line, right? But we need to address the texture on it, which in our case are these leather straps. So once you sketched out the area, make some thin edge highlights along those recesses of those straps. This will make these leather straps look crispy and sharp, like Granny's vision with her new reading glasses. We want opaque layers around his face and on the parts that look up, but we need to leave some recesses darker brown. That doesn't mean that some recesses couldn't receive a very thin layer of morghast bone to create a softer recess shadow, but try to be consistent with the highlight placement. If you made a part fully opaque, you might not need a very dark recess shadow next to it. But if your layers are less opaque, like in the back, you can leave those recesses darker. Add some ratskin flesh to our burnt red and highlight the leather suit, covering 60% of our previous burnt red layer. I build up the opacity layer by layer, so I don't need to work so much on the blending. That's the benefit of using thin layers, but if you are more comfortable with thicker layers, then use stippling for easier blends. I also use stippling at the back of her skirt to create a Raphael leather texture. The more you'd like to blend with stippling, the finer dots or lines you need around the area you like to blend. After that, I applied a couple of layers of glaze to blend in this new layer. Just dilute your paint a little bit and remove the excess from your brush on a paper towel, starting the brush stroke in the previous darker layer and ending it in the brighter color. 2 to 4 layers should be enough for a nice blend. We are not applying 60 layers with a super thin consistency, okay? That's Mickey Mouse. I mean, there is a time and place for it, but not this time and not this place. Less pointless glazing and more quality time with Granny Laborc, okay? So if your glaze is too thin, add more paint. If it covers too well, then add a little bit of water. Try experimenting with 1 part paint, 1 part water, and add more paint as you are more comfortable with the technique and understand how different paint consistencies behave. Let's reduce the highlight areas with pure ratskin flesh now. Really focus on the edge highlights on those leather straps. If you edge highlighted previously with burnt red, you don't have to edge highlight these straps all the way, but only the parts that face up and towards our light source. This way, the edge highlights have some volumetric feel to them. Use thicker paint consistency when you edge highlight. I would say that use the side of your brush's tip, but these parts are quite tiny, so it's easier to just freehand these lines. For the chest and right leg, I push the contrast even more, mixing some flesh gitz yellow to the ratskin flesh. This is my new favorite yellow, by the way, so vibrant and saturated, really love it. It reminds me of a huge zit that Granny had between her toes last week. For her underskirt, I used burnt red mixed with warpfiend grey, covering 80% of our remaining surface. Add some warpfiend grey to the mix and reduce the highlight areas towards the top and paint the edges where you can. Create some dots with your brush for the brightest highlights with pure warpfiend grey. Okay, time for the enamel parts. Do not be intimidated. If you could follow the tutorial up to this point, it's going to be easy peasy, and if you couldn't, let Papa Laborc know what problems you encountered. Mix some black to the warpfiend grey and cover the head of the axe. Leave a black line between the blade and the head part for some extra detail and mirror the highlights to the other side. Let's sketch the highlights with warpfiend grey. As you see, I'm using the same old thin layers like for the rest of the mini. This way it's very easy to make smooth blends. I also add some thin lines around the head and the blade to create some scratches on the metallic surface, adding some detail and wear and tear effect to her axe. On the skull on her belt, just highlight the top part and every edge where the light would catch it. So the lower part of the eye sockets, nose bone and the teeth. On those flat parts coming out of the belt, just create a simple gradient from the dark grey to the warpfiend grey. Add some radiant flesh to the warpfiend grey to push the contrast and also add some warmth to our blade this time. Highlight the edges and reduce the highlight areas on the blade. Remember to use thin layers if you want an easy and fast blending, moving your brush from the darker to the brighter parts while doing so, okay? Okay. Do some edge highlights around the head of the axe as well, with a thicker consistency. For our maximum highlight, we will use pale sand, but any off-white color of your choice would work just as fine. I forgot to hit record, so I slapped on my tiny hand, but I did a very thin filter of flesh gitz yellow with the airbrush with 1 part paint, 2 part water consistency. If you like this yellowish hue, just spray over the chest and the blade of the axe. If you don't, just skip this step. Other than that, I painted the wood shaft of the halberd with burnt red, creating thin lines to imitate a wood grain. And to highlight those wood grain on the top part, I used the burnt red and the ratskin flesh mixture that we used before. With that, our Hellion is done and ready for the table. If you want to see how I painted the base of the miniature, just check out my How to Paint Stone Tile Bases video. So thank you for joining me on this little painting adventure. A huge thanks to my Patreons who support this kind of videos, with special shout out to Jonathan Rhodes, Cold-Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, Rulzak, Vlad D, One Sharp Joe Crafts, Glitchy Macrash, Guillaume Belanger. If you want to support the work of Papa Laborc and have early access to these videos with some exclusive content, you can do that on Patreon. Or if you need a little bit of extra help, online coaching is also available. I hope the rest of your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.